Okay, chapter 22, part 2. In another dialogue, the disciple and the master converse about heaven and hell. The disciple asked his master, "Whither go the souls when they leave these mortal bodies?" His master answered, that soul needeth no going forth anywhere. Disciple, does it not enter into heaven or hell? Master, no, there is no such kind of entering. The soul hath heaven and hell in itself, and whether of the two states, either heaven or hell, shall be manifested in the soul, in that it standeth. The quotations given here are sufficient to indicate the character of the writings of an unlearned shoemaker from a little provincial town in Germany of the 16th and 17th centuries. Boehm is remarkable for the bright intellectuality of his comprehensions, although there is in them a strong moral element too. In the book above mentioned, The Varieties of Religious Experience, Professor James dwells with great attention on Christian mysticism, which afforded him much material for establishing the fact of the cognitive aspect of mysticism. I borrow from him the following description of the mystical experiences of certain Christian saints. Saint Ignatius confessed one day to Father Lanes that a single hour of meditation at Manfessa had taught him more truths about heavenly things than all the teachings of all the doctors put together could have taught him. One day in Orison, on the steps of the choir of the Dominican church, he saw in a distant manner the plane of divine wisdom in the creation of the world. On another occasion, during a procession, his spirit was ravished on God, and it was given him to contemplate, in a form and images fitted to the weak understanding of a dweller on earth, the deep mystery of the Holy Trinity. This last vision flooded his heart with such sweetness that mere memory of it in the after times made him shed abundant tears. One day, being in Orison, Saint Teresa writes, "It was granted me to perceive in one instant how all things are seen and contained in God. I did not perceive them in their proper form, and nevertheless the view I had of them was of a sovereign clearness and has remained vividly impressed upon my soul. It is one of the most signal of all the graces which the Lord has granted me. The view was so subtle and delicate that the understanding cannot grasp it." She goes on to tell Professor James writes how it was as if the deity was an enormous and sovereignly limpid diamond, in which all our actions were contained in such a way that their full sinfulness appeared evident and as never before. Our Lord made me comprehend, she writes, in what way it is that one God can be in three persons. He made me see it so clearly that I remained as extremely surprised as I was comforted. And now, when I think of the Holy Trinity or hear it spoken of, I understand how the three adorable persons form only one God, and I experienced an unspeakable happiness. Christian mysticism, as Professor James shows, is very near to the Vedanta and the Upanishads. The fountainhead of Christian mysticism, Dionysius the Areopagite, tells about the absolute truth in negative formula only. The cause of all things is neither soul nor intellect, nor has it imagination, opinion, or reason, or intelligence, nor is it reason or intelligence, nor is it spoken or thought. It is neither number, nor order, nor magnitude, nor littleness, nor equality, nor inequality, nor similarity, nor dissimilarity. It neither stands, nor moves, nor rests. It is neither essence, nor eternity, nor time. Even intellectual contact does not belong to it. Art is neither science nor truth. It is not even royalty or wisdom, not one, not unity, not divinity or goodness, nor even spirit as we know it. The writing of the mystics of the Greek Orthodox Church are collected in the books The Love of the Good, comprising 5 large and formidable volumes. I selected several examples of profound and fine mysticism from the book. Superconsciousness and the Paths to Its Attainment by M. V. Lodezhensky in Russian, who studied these books and found therein remarkable examples of philosophical thought. Imagine a circle, says Ava Dorotheus, 6th century, and in the middle of it, a center. Let me do that again. Imagine a circle, says Ava Dorotheus, 6th century, and in the middle of it, a center, and from this center, forthgoing radii. The farther these radii go from the center, the more divergent and remote from one another they become. Conversely, the nearer they approach to the center, the more they come together among themselves. Now suppose that this circle is the world, the very middle of it, God, and the straight lines, radii, going from the center to the circumference, or from the circumference to the center, are the paths of life of men. And in this case also, to the extent that the saints approach the middle of the circle, desiring to approach God, do they, by so doing, come nearer to God and to one another. Reason similarly with regard to their withdrawing from God. They withdraw also from one another, and by so much as they withdraw from one another, do they withdraw from God. Such is the attribute of love. To the extent that we are distant from God and do not love him, each of us is far from his neighbor also. If we love God, then to the extent that we approach to him through love of him, do we unite and love with our neighbors. And the closer our union with them, the closer is our union with God also. 1. Superconsciousness, page 266. Here now says Saint Isaac of Syria, 6th century, how man becomes refined, acquires spirituality, and becomes like the invisible forces. When the vision soars above things earthly, and above all troubles over earthly doings, and begins to experience revelations concerning that which is within, hidden from sight, and when it will turn its gaze upward and experiences faith in the guidance of future ages, and the ardent desire for promised things, when it will search for hidden mysteries, then faith itself consumes this knowledge and so transforms and regenerates it that it becomes entirely spiritual. Then may the vision soar on pinions into regions incorporeal, may touch the depths of inaccessible sea, participating in the mind divine and the miraculous acts of guidance in the hearts of thinking and feeling beings, discovering spiritual mysteries which become then comprehensible by the refined and simple mind. Then the inner senses are awakened to spirituality after the manner that they will be in the life immortal and incorruptible. For even here, this redemption of the mind is a true symbol of the general redemption. That's Superconsciousness, page 370. When the grace of the Holy Spirit, says Maxim Kapsok-Olevit, descends on anyone, there is shown to him nothing of the sensuous world, but that which he never saw or never imagined. Then the understanding of such a man receives from the Holy Spirit the highest and hidden mysteries, which according to the divine Paul, neither the human eye can understand nor the human reason comprehended unaided. That's 1 Corinthians 2. And that thou mayest understand how our reason sees them. Try to apprehend that which I say to thee. Wax, when it is placed far from fire, is solid, and it is possible to take it and hold it. But as soon as it is thrown in fire, it immediately melts, takes fire, burns, blazes, and ends thus in the midst of flames. So also is human reason when it is alone by itself, ununited with God. Then it comprehends in the usual way and according to its power all things surrounding it. But as it approaches the fire of divinity and the Holy Ghost, then it is entirely enveloped by that divine fire and immersed in divine meditation. And then in that fire of divinity, it is impossible for it to think about its own affairs and about that which it desires. Superconsciousness, page 370. Saint Basil the Great says about the revelation of God, absolutely unutterable and indescribable are the lightning-like splendors of divine beauty, neither can speech express nor hearing apprehend. Shall we name the brilliance of the morning star, the brightness of the moon, the radiance of the sun? The glory of all these is unworthy of being compared with the true light, standing farther from it than does the gloomiest night and the most terrible darkness from the midday brightness. This beauty, invisible to bodily eyes, comprehensible to the soul and mind only, if it illumines some of the saints, leaves in them an unbearable wound through their desire that this vision of divine beauty should extend over an eternity of life. Disturbed by this earthly life, they loathe it as thought it were a prison. Superconsciousness, page 372. Saint Theogenes says, "A strange world will I say to thee. There is some hidden mystery which proceeds between God and the soul. This is experienced by those who achieve the highest heights of perfect purity of love and faith, when man, changing completely, unites with God as his own through ceaseless prayer and contemplation." Superconsciousness, page 381. Certain parts of the writings of Clement of Alexandria, 2nd century, are remarkably interesting. It appears to us that painting appears to take in the whole field of view in the scenes represented, but it gives a false description of the view, according to the rules of the art, employing the signs that result from the incidence of the lines of vision. By this means, the higher and the lower points in the view and those between are preserved, and some objects seem to appear in the foreground, and others in the background, and others to appear in some other way on the smooth and level surface. So also philosophers copy the truth after the manner of painting. Clement of Alexandria here reveals one very important aspect of truth, namely, its inexpressibility in words and the entire conditionality of all philosophical systems and formulations. Dialectically, truth is represented only in perspective, i.e., in an inevitably deformed shape. Such is his idea. What time and labor would be saved, and from what enormous and unnecessary suffering would humanity save itself, could it but understand this one simple thing, that truth cannot be expressed in our language. Then would men cease to think that they possess truth, would cease to force others to accept their truth at any cost, would see that others may approach truth from another direction exactly as they themselves approached it, by a way of their own. How many arguments, how many religious struggles, how much of violence towards the thoughts of others would be rendered unnecessary and impossible if men would only understand that nobody possesses truth, but all are seeking for it, each in his own way. The ideas of Clement of Alexandria about God are highly interesting and closely approximate to those of Vedanta, and particularly to the ideas of the Chinese philosophers. The discourse respecting God is the most difficult to handle, for since the first principle of everything is difficult to find out, the absolutely first and the oldest principle, which is the cause of all other things being and having been, is difficult to exhibit. For how can that be expressed which is neither genus, nor difference, nor species, nor individual, nor number, nay more, is neither an event, nor that to which an event happens? No one can rightly express this wholly, for on account of his greatness he is ranked as the all, and is the Father of the universe. nor are any parts to be predicated of them. For the one is indivisible, wherefore also it is infinite, not considered with reference to its being without dimensions and not having a limit. And therefore it is without form and name. And if we name it, we do not do so properly, terming it either the one or the good, or mind, or absolute being, or Father, or God, or Creator, or Lord. We speak not as supplying his name, but for want. We use good names in order that the mind may have these as points of support, so as not to err in other respects. Among Chinese mystical philosophers, our attention is arrested by Lao Tzu, 6th century BC, and Chuang-Tzu, 4th century BC, by the cleanliness of thought and the unusual simplicity with which they express the most profound doctrines of idealism. The sayings of Lao Tzu. The Tao, which can be expressed in words, is not the eternal Tao. The name which can be uttered is not its eternal name. Tao eludes the sense of sight and is therefore called colorless. It eludes the sense of hearing and therefore called soundless. It eludes the sense of touch and is therefore called incorporeal. These three qualities cannot be apprehended, and hence they may be blended into unity. Ceaseless in action, it cannot be named, but returns again to nothingness. We may call it the form of the formless, the image of the imageless, the fleeting and the indeterminable. There is something chaotic yet complete, which existed before heaven and earth. Oh, how still it is and formless, standing alone without changing, reaching everywhere without suffering harm. Its name I know not. To designate it, I call it Tao. Endeavoring to describe it, I call it great. Being great, it passes on. Passing on, it becomes remote. Having become remote, it returns. The law of Tao is its own spontaneity. Tao, in its unchanging aspect, has no name. The mightiest manifestations of active force flow from Tao. Tao, as it exists in the world, is like great rivers and seas which receive the streams from the valleys. All-pervading is the great Tao. It can be at once on the right hand and on the left. Tao is a great square with no angles, a great sound which cannot be heard, a great image with no form. Tao produced unity, unity produced duality, duality produced trinity, and trinity produced all existing objects. He who acts in accordance with Tao becomes one with Tao. All the world says that my Tao is great, but unlike other teachings, it is just because it is great that it appears unlike other teachings. Wow. If it had this likeness, long ago would its smallness have been known. The sage attends to the inner and not to the outer. He puts away the objective and holds to the subjective. The sage occupies himself with inaction and conveys instructions without words. Who is there that can make muddy clear water? But if allowed to remain still, it will gradually become clear of itself. Who is there that can secure a state of absolute repose? But let time go on, and the state of repose will gradually arise. Tao is eternally inactive, and yet it leaves nothing undone. The pursuit of book learning brings about daily increase, i.e., the increase of knowledge. The practice of Tao brings about daily loss, i.e., the loss of ignorance. Repeat the loss again and again, and you will arrive at inaction. Practice inaction, and there is nothing which cannot be done. Practice inaction, occupy yourself with doing nothing. Leave all things to take their natural course and do not interfere. All things in nature work silently. Among mankind, the recognition of beauty as such implies the idea of ugliness, and the recognition of good implies the idea of evil. Cast off your holiness, rid yourself of sagacity, and the people will benefit 100-fold. Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know. He who acts destroys, he who grasps loses. Therefore the sage does not act, and so he does not destroy. He does not grasp, and so he does not lose. The soft overcomes the hard, the weak overcomes the strong. There is no one in the world but knows this truth, and no one who can put it into practice. A meditation of Shang Tzu. You cannot speak of ocean to a well frog, the creature of a narrower sphere. You cannot speak of ice to a summer insect, the creature of a season. You cannot speak of Tao to a pedagogue. His scope is too restricted. But now that you have emerged from your narrow sphere and have seen the great ocean, you know your own significance, and I can speak to you of great principles. Dimensions are limitless, time is endless, conditions are not invariable, terms are not final. There is nothing which is not objective, there is nothing which is not subjective, but it is impossible to start from the objective. Only from subjective knowledge is it possible to proceed to objective knowledge. When subjective and objective are both without their correlates, that is the very axis of Tao. Tao has its laws and its evidences. It is devoid both of action and of form. It may be obtained but cannot be seen. Spiritual beings draw their spirituality from Tao. To Tao, no point in time is long ago. Tao cannot be existent. If it were existent, it could not be non-existent. The very name of Tao is only adapted for convenience sake. Predestination and chance are limited to material existences. How can they bear upon the infinite? Tao is something beyond material existences. It cannot be conveyed either by words or by silence. In the state which is neither speech nor silence, its transcendental nature may be apprehended. In contemporary theosophical literature, two little books stand out: The Voice of the Silence by H.B. Blavatsky and Light on the Path by Mabel Collins. In both of them, there is much of real mystical sentiment. The Voice of Silence. He who would hear the voice of the silence, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of the perfect inward concentration of the mind, accompanied by complete abstraction from everything pertaining to the external universe of the world of senses. Having become indifferent to objects of perception, the pupil must seek out the Raha of senses, the thought producer, him who awakes illusions. The mind is the greatest slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. For when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams, when he ceases to hear the many, he may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer. Then only, not till then, shall he forsake the region of Asat, the false, to come into the realm of Sat, the true. Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshly eyes be rendered blind to illusion. Before the soul can hear, the image man has to become as deaf to warnings as to whispers, to cries of bellowing elephants as to the silvery buzzing of golden firefly. And then to the inner ear will speak and say, if the soul smiles while bathing in the sunlight of thy life, if the soul sings within her chrysalis of flesh and matter, if thy soul weeps inside her castle of illusion, if thy soul struggles to break the silver thread that binds her to the master, know, O disciple, thy soul is of the earth. Give up thy life if thou wouldest live. Learn to discern the real from the false, the ever-fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the eye from the heart doctrine. Light on the path like the voice of the sun. That was the end. Light on the path like the voice of the silence is full of symbols, hints, and hidden meanings. This is a little book which makes demands upon the reader. Its meaning is elusive, and it requires to be read in a fitting state of spirit. Light on the path prepares the disciple to meet the master, i.e., the ordinary consciousness for communion with the higher consciousness. According to the author of Light on the Path, the terms the masters is the symbolical expression for the divine life. Light on the path. Before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears. Before the ear can hear, it must have lost its sensitiveness. Before the voice can speak in the presence of the masters, it must have lost the power to wound. Before the soul can stand in the presence of the masters, its feet must be washed in the blood of the heart. Kill out all sense of separateness. Desire only that which is within you. Desire only that which is beyond you. Desire only that which is unattainable. For within you is the light of the world. If you are unable to perceive it within you, it is useless to look for it elsewhere. It is unattainable, because it forever recedes. You will enter the light, but you will never touch the flame. Seek out the way. Look for the flower to bloom in the silence that follows the storm, not till then. And on the deep silence, the mystery's event will occur which will prove that the way has been found. Call it by what name you will. It speaks in a voice that speaks where there is none to speak. It is a messenger that comes, a messenger without form or substance, or it is the flower of the soul that has opened. It cannot be described by any metaphor. To hear the voice of the silence is to understand that from within comes the only true guidance. For when the disciple is ready, the master is ready also. Hold fast to that which is neither substance nor existence. Listen only to the voice which is soundless. Look only on that which is invisible. Professor James calls attention in his book to the unusually vivid emotionality of mystic experiences, and to the quite unusual sensations felt by mystics. The deliciousness of some of these states can seem to be beyond anything known in ordinary consciousness. It evidently involves organic sensibilities, for it is spoken of as something too extreme to be borne, and as verging on bodily pain, but it is too subtle and piercing of delight for ordinary words to denote. God's touches, the wounds of his spear, references to aberrity and to mystical union have to figure in the phraseology by which it is shadowed forth. The joy of communion with God, described by Saint Simon, the New Theologian, 10th century, may serve as an example of such an experience. I am wounded by the arrow of his love, writes Saint Simon. He is himself inside of me, in my heart. He embraces me, kisses me, fills me with light. A new flower grows in me, now new because it is joyous. The flower is of an unutterable form, is seen when it grows merely, then suddenly disappears. Its indescribable appearance attracts my mind to itself, causes forgetfulness of everything to do with fear, and then flies suddenly away. Then does the tree of fear remain again lacking fruit. I moan in sorrow and pray to thee, my Christ. Again I see the flower amid the branches. I chain my attention to it alone, and I see not the tree alone, but the brilliant flower attracting me to itself irresistibly. This flower grows in the end into the fruit of love. Incomprehensible is it how from fear grows love. Mysticism penetrates into all religions. In India, Professor James says, training in mystical insight has been known from time immemorial under the name of yoga. Yoga means the experimental union of the individual with the divine. It is based on persevering exercise, and the diet, posture, breathing, intellectual concentration, and moral discipline vary slightly in the different systems which teach it. The yogi or disciple who has by these means overcome the obscurations of his lower natural sufficiently enters into the condition termed samadhi, and he comes face to face with facts which no instinct or reason can ever know. When a man comes out of samadhi, Vedantists assure us that he remains enlightened, a sage, a prophet, a saint. His whole character changed, his life changed, illumined. The Buddhists use the word samadhi as well as the Hindus, but dhyana is their special word for the highest states of contemplation. Higher stages still of contemplation are mentioned, a region where there exists nothing and where the meditator says there exists absolutely nothing and stops. Then he reaches another region and says there are neither ideas nor absence of ideas and stops again. Then another region where, having reached the end of both idea and perception, he stops finally. This would seem to be not yet nirvana, but as close an approach to it as this life affords. In Mohammedanism, there is such a mysticism also. The most characteristic expression of Muslim mysticism is Persian Sufism. This is at the same time a religious sect and a philosophical school of high idealistic character, which struggled against materialism and against the narrow fanaticism and the literal understanding of the Quran. The Sufis interpreted the Quran mystically. Sufism, this is the philosophical free thinking of Mohammedanism, united with an entirely original symbolical and brightly sensuous poetry which has always a hidden mystical character. The blossoming of Sufism occurred in the early centuries of the second millennium of the Christian era. Sufism remained for a long time incomprehensible to European thought. From the point of view of Christian theology and Christian morality, the mixing up of sensuous and religious ecstasy is incomprehensible. But in the Orient, the two coexisted with perfect harmony. In the Christian world, the flesh has always been regarded as inimical to the spirit. In the Muslim world, the fleshly and sensuous was accepted as a symbol of spiritual things. The expression of philosophical and religious truths in the language of love was widely disseminated custom throughout the Orient. These things are oriental flowers of elegance. All allegories, all metaphors were taken from love. Muhammad fell in love with God, the Arabs say, desiring to convey the brightness of the religious ardor of Muhammad. Select for thyself a new wife every spring of the new year, because last year's calendar is no good, says the Persian poet and philosopher Sadi. And in such curious form, Sadi expresses the thought that Ibsen puts in the mouth of Dr. Stockman. Truths are not, as many believe, like long-living Methuselahs. Under normal conditions, a truth may exist about 17 or 18 years, rarely longer. The poetry of the Sufis will become clear to us if we always keep in mind this general, sensuous character of the literary language of the Orient, the heritage of profound antiquity. A classic example of this ancient literature is the Song of Songs. Many parts of the Bible and all ancient myths or stories are distinguished by sensuousness of form strange to us. The Persian mystical poet Sufis wrote about the love of God in the expressions applicable to their beautiful women, saying the translator of Jamie and other poets, Davis, because as they explain this, nobody can write in heavenly language and be understood. Persian mystics. The idea of Sufism, Max Muller says, is a loving union of the soul with God. The Sufi holds that there is nothing in human language that can express the love between the soul and God so well as the love between man and woman, and that if he is to speak of the union between the two at all, he can only do so in the symbolic language of earthly love. When we read some of the Sufi and raptured poetry, we must remember that the Sufi poets use a number of expressions which have recognized meaning in their language. Their sleep means meditation, perfume, hope of the divine favor, kisses and embraces, the raptures of piety, wine means spiritual knowledge, etc. The flowers which a lover of God had gathered in his rose garden, and which he wished to give to his friends, so overpowered his mind by their fragrance that they fell out of his lap and withered. Sadi says, a poet desires to express by this that the glory of ecstatic visions pales and fades away when it has to be put into human language. Max Muller, Theosophy. Hold on one second. Man, okay. Generally speaking, never and nowhere has poetry been so blended with mysticism as in Sufism. The Sufi poets frequently lived the strange lives of hermits, anchorites, and wanderers, at the same time singing of love, the beauty of women, the aroma of roses and wine. Jalal Eden describes as follows the communion of the soul with God. A loved one said to her lover to try him early one morning, "O such a one, son of such a one, I marvel whether you hold me more dear or yourself. Tell me truly, O ardent lover." He answered, "I am so entirely absorbed in you that I am full of you from head to foot. Of my own existence nothing but the man remains, in my being is nothing besides you. O object of my desire, therefore I am thus lost in you. A stone which has been changed into a pure ruby is filled with the bright light of the sun." In two well-known poems of Jamie, 15th century, Salman and Abezel and Yusuf and Zuleika, the ascending of the soul, its purification and its union with God is represented in the most passionate forms. I gotta pause right there. Can't do it. I got bread in the oven, so I gotta get on that, and then I'll try to. Boy, it's a long chapter. I don't even know how many pages are left. Okay, I could probably get this done today. I'll be back. I close this thing down.